partially for each of them. Okay, so you hear the question. That was the question that we were dealing with last week. Now let's just run quickly through the tshuva. Bedin ma'avid shetzarich l'shalim l'shnei po'alim v'yesh lo l'shalim rak le'echad mehem. So as far as the question, you have two people who did work for you, and you only have enough money to pay one of them. Im yitain le'echad mehem bizman hu vada yekayim mitzvahs b'yomot yitain scharo lefachot bo. If you give one of them his full wage, you will have fulfilled the mitzvah of b'yomot yitain scharo, at least for him. Aval im yitain lekol echad chetzi, yesh ladum ha'im yekayim b'zeh mitzvat b'yomot yitain scharo b'chatzi shir olo. But if you give each one 10 grand, half of what you owe each one, will you fulfill at least the partial mitzvah of b'yomot yitain scharo? The Torah says, give him his wages. What if I only have enough to give you half now? Is that better? And then I fulfilled at least the partial mitzvah for each of you. So this is a shaila about fulfilling a partial mitzvah. So I don't know if there's anything comparable in secular law in this regard. I would assume that there may be, but it's of a different genre over here.
Yeah, I mean, to fulfill a legal obligation is the legal obligation. To mitigate damages or whatever, you can mitigate a little bit, but that's part of that, but it's not the fulfillment of the right for the obligation.
Okay. Hine b'gemara b'maseches yom anechluku Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish ha'im chatzi shir b'isurin aser me'atorah o midrabanan. So there's a shaila that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish debate. If a person ingests a chatzi shir of a prohibited substance, let's say half of a kazayas of food on Yom Kippur, okay, has he committed a Torah prohibition, or has he only committed a rabbinic prohibition? Limashal, for example, ha'ochel nevelu treifa over alav v'lo gerakim ochel kazayas. So if you eat nevela, right, take a bite out of a non-kosher hamburger, you're only in violation if you eat a kazayas of hamburger. Avol pachos mekazayas, but if you eat less than a kazayas, l'das Rabbi Yochanan afal pi shalom mekabel malkus mikol makom over alisur Torah afilu shezeh chatzi shir. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, you still violate a Torah. You've committed a Torah prohibition of chatzi shir. You've had a smaller amount than the Torah prohibits, so you won't get malkus, but you've still committed a biblical violation. Aval l'das Reish Lakish zeh aser midrabanan. But according to Reish Lakish, it's only aser rabbinically. V'ha'halacha k'Rabbi Yochanan shechatzi shir aser min haTorah kamo shekasav HaRambam. We paskin like Rabbi Yochanan that half an amount is a Torah violation. Now, this sort of is an indication that doing less than what the Torah prohibits is still prohibited from the Torah. Okay. Now,
so on Yom Kippur, where someone has to eat, don't we say they should eat a lesser amount every 9 minutes or something?
Yes, that's right.
So are they breaking? Is that rabbinic? What's the status of eating like that? I know it's for health reasons. So
right. So it's an interesting shaila. Usually, most of the poskim assume that you're still considered to be technically fasting, because it could be that fasting is maybe of a different genre. But we'll have to. It's a good question. It's a legitimate question. Amnam kol ze belavin, aval hasheila hi ha'im gam b'mitzvahs asay mekayim mitzvah k'shemekayim b'chatzi shir. So that's as far as violations. What about fulfillment of mitzvahs? Are you considered to be having fulfilled a mitzvah if you've only done a portion of that mitzvah? Now, like for example, a mitzvah of shaking arba minim. You may be fulfilling a partial mitzvah. Have you fulfilled a partial mitzvah if I only have 3 out of the 4 species?
Or is each one on its own?
Or is each one on its own?
that seems like an all or nothing because it's the 4. That's
perhaps. Kagon b'mikreh hazeh she'im yitain l'chol echad chatzi mischaro Do you fulfill the mitzvah of biyomot titein schar, give him his wage on when it's due? Do you fulfill that by giving each one half of what he's owed? B'hinei das harav Shavuos Yankov, he de'ein mitzvah b'chatzi shir klal, behevi lazeraya mehilchos shvuos. He says the Shavuos Yaakov says that you do not fulfill the mitzvah of if you do less than the amount. So, because for example, the Shavuos Yaakov, as he says in the Makor Baruch, brings a raya as follows. He says, let's say a person took a vow that he's not going to eat matzah for the entire year. For 1 year, I'm not eating matzah. The night of the Seder arrives, and he's not allowed to eat matzah the night of Pesach. So he has a dilemma, but the shvua is still chal, and so he cannot fulfill the mitzvah. So the Shavuos Yaakov says, when he took the shvua, he only swore that he's not going to do an achila, a regular eating of matzah. But why doesn't he just eat less than a kazayas of matzah and at least fulfill some level of the mitzvah of matzah and still not be in violation of his vow? So the Shavuos Yaakov infers from there that eating less than a kazayas of matzah is not the mitzvah. Okay. Anyway, that's his proof. V'chein mashma medivrei hamagen Avraham shekasav demishalo yodea levarich birkas hamazon ba'al peh v'yodea levarich rak bracha echas. The Magen Avraham has an interesting halacha. He says, what if a person does not know the benching by heart, and he's eaten bread, and there's no bencher, there's no sitter available, and all he knows is the first bracha by heart. Ha'im yivarich ota o lo yivarich bichlal. So what would you paskin? Should he say the first paragraph, or should he not say anything at all?
Part of it is
I
added
would say
on.
yes, and I have reason for saying that.
I'm sure you do.
Want to let us know? Is it a secret?
Okay.
Experience, I should say that
Yeah.
is experience.
Yeah. I mean, intuitively, we would all say, do whatever you can, right?
Right.
However, the Magen Avraham says something very interesting. He says, "V'kasav b'shem harif sheshloshes habrachos ma'akvo zu ezu." He says the three blessings are interdependent. The first three blessings, because the first three blessings of benching are midioraisa. V'im lo yodea rak echad mehem lo yivarich klal. And if you don't know one of them, you can't say any of them. Kevin sheshloshes habrachos nechshavas l'mitzvah echas. Ubracha echas nechsheves l'chatzi shir ve'in mitzvah b'chatzi shir. He says the three brachos are one unit, and saying only one or two out of those three is considered to be a chatzi shir, and there's no mitzvah to do a chatzi shir.
Isn't that right? We're just getting.
Well, it could be then a bracha levatala.
Yeah.
It could be then a bracha levatala.
Yeah, but the whole
What does Chatzi Shir mean, Rabbi?
Chatzi shir is doing half the amount that the law prescribes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I think there might have been a question for me.
Yeah. I answered him.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought it was.
Yeah.
Talk about my experience. So I went to Associated as a kid, and what they used to do there, they used to have their time was over everybody at lunchtime. And we only did the first paragraph.
Yeah,
So.
we did that at camp.
Mrs. Snyder, would you remember Mrs. Snyder? Yes, Mrs. Snyder, right. And that's what they did, they just did the first paragraph.
Okay.
That's all she did.
Now.
Associated.
Oh, come on.
Now.
But isn't the
Look,
What happened to you, Ron?
you could argue that for the sake of chinuch,
Yeah.
it would be permissible to do that, but
It's to give, like, you're giving, like, you have somewhat of a course to talk for the food is really, if you eat, if you make a bracha, your concept is to give giving thanks in recognition where the food comes from. If you're thinking about that, aren't you making some of the mitzvah?
you would think that, whatever you can do to bless God for the food that he has given you. And if
So it's all or nothing here, is what the mother would say.
this is what the Magen Avraham says.
to know.
So we see that more
no,
with
I know.
Lulav and Esro, because they're,
I wouldn't know.
all four seem integral to us, we don't have a problem saying
Right.
if you only had three, don't bother shaking it. But here, for some reason, because we don't understand how the three are integrated together. Like I'm thinking about head and arm trilling. Those are separate mitzvahs. If you only had one, you would do the one, right?
That's right. That's right. So there are certain instances where there is no interdependency, and there are other instances where there is interdependency in the mitzvah.
So sorry, Rabbi, is it considered full of error if someone doesn't know how to bench, not to bench after eating?
Well, the question is, look, if a person is an onus and they simply don't have access to the words of the benching, they should just do their best to thematically thank God based on the three themes of the blessings of Birkas Hamazon, which is you bless Hashem for the food, you bless Hashem for the aretz, al haaretz ve'al hamazon, and then the third blessing is for the bris that God gave us, the covenant that God made with us, that which is manifest in our flesh with the bris milah. So those are the three.
What does that have to do with food?
Oh, it's a good question. Why should we have to mention that after we eat our food? And what does the land have to do with it? Al haaretz.
Well,
the food
it's
comes from
growing. That
Right,
seems sensible.
but it's a reference specifically to the land of Israel. It seems from the Gemara that and the language of the bracha is that the land that you gave to our forefathers. So what if I'm eating wheat from Alberta? So why should that? Why should that
And
count?
then why would it be that if the first blessing, which is thanking for the sustenance, would
think
be
that'd
enough?
suffice,
Like,
yeah.
I should not do that because I don't know the other two. It doesn't fly with me.
Yeah, and for all the other brothers, almost we just thank for the food.
Yeah. So we're gonna have to work our way. We're gonna have to
Put that on the bench and come back to that.
work our way through this.
Interesting.
Okay, so we'll skip the footnote for now, just so that we can get to the meat of the tshuva. The Chain Kosov b'Sefer Chayi b'nei Chay, the Sefer b'nei Chaye, the Ein Mitzvah b'Chatzi Shir. This Sefer b'nei Chaye also says that there is no mitzvah just to do half of the mitzvah. V'hevi raya lezeh mehabrais b'Maseches Yoma shebimei Shimon Hatzadik haita bracha b'lechem hapanim. B'chol kohen shemakabel kazayis yesh ochlo v'sabeya v'yesh ochlo umotir. So he brings proof from an Agadata actually in Tractate Yoma. The Gemara in Yoma says that Shimon HaTzadik was so righteous that miracles were daily manifest in the temple. There's the law of the showbread, right? The lechem hapanim, that the Kohanim would distribute among themselves every Shabbos. They would or every Friday, I think, they would change the bread, and the Kohanim would get the old bread. But the bread was so miraculously blessed that if a Kohen would eat a kazayas of it, just an olive size of that bread, it would be filling like a meal. You would feel full, and some would feel overfull. They would feel stuffed because they would have to leave over food.
But also it stayed fresh.
And was fresh, miraculously fresh. Misha nifter Shimon HaTzadik nishtalcha me'era b'lechem hapanim v'haya magia l'chol kohen chaticha ketana kamo pool. So he says, when Shimon HaTzadik passed away, a curse was found in the bread, meaning that it didn't have any of the original, the bracha, right? And so each kohen would get a small little piece, the size of a little bean. And people, the Kohanim who were more modest and more restrained, would not take, and only the more grub Kohanim they would be online to grab as whatever they could. Now it's like, the Hasidim at the Tish, who's the first one to get the piece of kugel. The cost of Haritva Sham, Shahatsnuim, Mashchu Yedeim, Dafka Mishum Shahayagia Magia Lahem Kipul. The Ritva writes that the more refined Kohanim would just refrain from taking anything because the piece was smaller than a kazayas. It was just the size of a little bean. Aval im haya magia lahem kazayas lo haya moshchem es yedehem kevin sheyesh mitzvah lechol kazayas min hakodshim. But if they would have been offered a kazayas, they would have for sure taken, because there's a mitzvah midoraisa to eat, for the kohen to eat the kodshim. As the Torah says, they shall eat that which brings atonement. So this too implies that the Kohanim would refrain from eating because there was no mitzvah.
So after the time of Shimon HaTzadik, it stopped? The fact that this
After the time of Shimon HaTzadik, it was no longer a miraculous phenomenon. So just basically things went back to normal, like you and I would experience them. So, and the Gemara lists a number of miracles that happened in the times of Shimon HaTzadik. The Gemara says that miraculously, the Ner Ma'aravi, the western light, one of the lights of the menorah would light, even though there was only enough oil to burn overnight, it would burn for 24 hours.
And afterwards it didn't?
And afterwards it just burnt out in the morning. Yeah. I forget what the other miracles were, but that one I remember also.
So that's like for hundreds of years this time. Shimon HaTzadik was the Anshe Knesset.
Shimon HaTzadik was the last member of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. He was quite elderly when he passed away. He was over 100, I think. So he was around, I think, at the beginning of the Second Temple, and he lives for the first century of the Second Temple. I'm not sure the timeline precisely, but he dies 2 generations before the Hasmonean dynasty. Okay, so he's in the times of Alexander the Great, and it's Alexander's descendants that perpetrate the Hanukkah story. V'chein kasav lahochiach shut sefer Yehoshua mima shepasak moran b'shulchan aruch she'adam shenimtza b'rosh Hashanah be'ezeh makom ve'ein mi sheyotzi oso yidei chova b'tkiya shofar. So this Shilas Teshuvas Sefer Yehoshua brings another proof. He says the Shulchan Aruch paskins that if a person finds himself at a certain place on Rosh Hashanah and there's no one who can be motzi him in shofar blowing, the yeshlo shofar, the yachol litkor rak tekiya or rak shavarim, and he has a shofar. So let's say I have a shofar on Rosh Hashanah, but I'm not like Izzy Kutnowski. I can't blow like the whole thing. I can maybe get out a tekiya or two. I can maybe get out a shvarim. So what should I do? Should I do at least that, or do I not do anything at all? So kasav haShulchan Aruch sham shelo yitka bichlal. The Shulchan Aruch surprisingly says don't blow at all. Okay, umash she'ein
How do you
mitzvah.
practice?
Well, you do it before Rosh Hashanah. Don't start practicing the morning of Rosh Hashanah.
That's good to know.
In case anyone ever asks you to blow shofar, don't leave it to the last minute. Umashmash she'ein mitzvah b'chatzi shir v'yesh od kama v'kama rayas lezeh. And there are more proofs to this as well.
So is that an aside? Is all or nothing for Kiyah Shofar? Based on the other 2 sources
Here.
we talked about.
It would seem that way. Yeah, that's the second proof. There's no chatzi shir mitzvah. You want to take a look at that halacha? Let's take a look for just a second. Orach Chaim Siman Taf Kuf Tzadi Gimel Beis. Let's take a look. Okay. What is the Machaber talking about? We're coming into this. Bracha shel Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippur ma'akva zu azu. The blessings that you say, presumably in the Amidah on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, all of them need to be said. She'im enu yodea klum, kulam rather. That is, if you don't know all of the blessings, lo yomar mashi yodea mehem, ela lo yomar klum. Don't say, well, I'll just say what I know. Let's say you have a machzor with you and it's missing half of the Musaf Amida. Yeah. You just bought a brand new machzor and you open it up and lo and behold, the printer, that happens, so many times. It's the most frustrating thing. The printer missed some pages, right? And you're in the middle of Shemon Esrei and all of a sudden you can't go forward. Yeah, right. So what do you do? So the Mechaber says, if you know that you only have half of the brachas of the Amida, you shouldn't say it at all. Elalo yomar klum. And then he says in the next sif, he says, V'chein tikiyos ma'akva zu azu. Similarly, there are 30 blasts of the shofar you have to hear on Rosh Hashanah, and they're ma'akev each other. In other words, if you don't know one, you can't do any of them. V'hani mili she'ena yodeya ela mixas hasimin shelo yasa oso mixas sheyodeya. That's if you don't know one whole line. So then, like tekiya shvarim tekiya. Then don't do just the tekiya and then leave out the shvarim. He says, aval tashrat tashat tarat ein ma'akvin zeh. But if you know tashrat, tekiya, shvarim, trua, tekiya, well, that's not a good example. Let's say you know how to do a tekiya, shvarim, tekiya, but you don't know how to do a trua. So you can do at least a tekiya, shvarim, tekiya, as long as you can do the whole thing with the tekiya in the first, and then the shvarim in the middle, and then the tekiya at the end. Even if you don't know how to do a trua, but at least you know how to do that, so that much you can do. The imyada lasos echad mehem oshnayim osa, and therefore, what?
It's called Yom Teruah.
Well, the whole issue
We
is
don't know what the true is.
we don't know what the word trua means. Does it mean a shvarim or does it mean a trua? So then he writes, the Ramah writes, aval habrachos ein ma'akvin hatkiyos. But if you don't know the brachos, you can still blow shofar. V'chein hatkiyos ein ma'akvin habrachos ve'eze mehem sheyodea yasa. And the tekiyos are not ma'akev the brachos. So if you know the blessings of the Amidah, you just don't know how to blow shofar, you should at least daven. V'chein sidron eino ma'akev v'im hispal kodem shetaka yatsa. And similarly, the order is not ma'akev. So let's say you can daven musaf before you hear shofar, right? Because as long as, let's say you don't know that someone's bringing you a shofar and you don't have it yet, and v'im hispal kodem shetaka yatsa. Therefore, if you daven before tkiyas, you are yotze. Let's just take a quick look at the Mishnah Berurah.
Something should happen in the middle of new stuff, and you do find that that page is missing. Would be the best thing to say is Rushain, the word, and then stop, and then go back to beginning with another sitter and start again.
I don't think that would be the best course. I think the best thing to do would be to close the sitter, go, you're allowed to take steps, just interrupt, go get another sitter, go back to your place and put your feet together again. You don't have to start all over again. You can just continue, meaning that the requirement to have your feet together, if for whatever reason you have to step away from that place, that doesn't prevent what you've said so far from counting. It still counts. He says, so the reason why the Mishnah Berurah says that you would do one full line, he says, he says, really, any one of the sets, whether it's tashrat, tashat, or tarat, you fulfill the Torah obligation, because the Torah, that's what the Torah requires: a tekiah before, a trua in the middle, and a tekiah at the end. We don't know what a trua is, as he said. So we do three. We do a tekiah shvarim tekiah, because a shvarim may be what the Torah calls it, a trua, or it may be a trua, or it may be both, a shvarim and a trua. So because we have the suffix, we do all three. But one thing we know for sure, the Torah requires a tekiah to come before the trua and a tekiah to come after the trua. And therefore, if you don't know how to do, let's say, a tekiah before or a tekiah after, then you shouldn't do any of it. Let me just see about the Aruch HaShulchan. Let's see if he says something, anything more than that. So he says, "V'chein hatikiyos ma'akva zu azu shem yodea lasos tikiyah ve'en biyacholto lasos trua lo yasa gam tikiyah." If you know how to do a tikiyah, but you don't know how to do a trua, you shouldn't blow even a tikiyah. Okay. He doesn't say anything more than that. So it's got to be done as a whole thing. Now, you could argue that that's because when the definition of Tekiah Shofar on Rosh Hashanah is Tekiah first, then Trua, then Tekiah. But it's still not really fully answering our question as far as Biyomoti Tein Scharo. Is it an all or nothing prospect, or is there a possibility just to do a portion of it? It's tons of notes on this. So let us continue. He says, Abol yesh rayot achirot, demashma sheyesh mitzvah b'chatzi shir. But then there are other indications from other sources that you can fulfill a mitzvah halfway. Dihine yesh lahavi raya lazem mimasha kasav b'shulchan aruch. Diyesh li zohar sheshnei moyelim lo yamulu tinok echad b'shabbos. Dahainu shezeh yamul v'zeh yifra. You shouldn't have two moyelim participate in one bris on Shabbos only, meaning that one moil cuts the foreskin and the other moil does the priya. Do you know what priya means? Okay, priya means when after you remove the foreskin, there's a membrane that's underneath the foreskin. It's called the laminus mucosa. And a moil has to tear that membrane and make sure that it falls below the corona of the penis. What?
You said that tear.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, it's not vascular at all. It doesn't really. When you tear it, there's very little.
You cut it or tear it?
Either way, it could be a cut, it could be a dorsal cut, or it could be a tear. That's why moilim have longer nails on a lot of them, because they tear with their fingernails. Yeah. It's a very, very, it's not like skin, it's a membrane. So it's very easy to tear.
So it's not torn if you don't have a bris?
It's not torn if you don't have a bris?
Like it's underneath the foreskin. So
It's underneath the foreskin. As a human being gets older, as a male gets older, no. As a male gets older, it hardens and it becomes attached to the foreskin and just becomes a part of the foreskin. But when you're dealing with a newborn baby, you tear the foreskin, but the membrane remains. We'll have to hold it here. We'll talk a little bit more about your anatomy tomorrow.
Anatomy 101
Yeah,
tomorrow.
yeah.
When you cut off